everyone? True Techno Gamer here, and I have another video I wanted to talk about. It's been on my mind for a bit. Um, so I want to talk about the death of exclusives, right? In gaming. What do I mean by that? Well, if you look at gaming in 2023, we're seeing that there are less exclusive, games, exclusive titles released per whatever platform you're interested in. This is pretty much across the board, PC and consoles. Back in the day, for folks old enough to remember the 90s and, probably early 2000s, on any platform. I mean, if you had your Sega Genesis, your Super Nintendo, your Sony PlayStation, right, and then your N64, there was a lot of games, right, that you could only find on said platform, right? If you liked some of like the Japanese fighting games like Tekken, you can only find that on PlayStation at the time, as an example. PlayStation came out the gate, brought us franchises like Gran Turismo, right? That was an amazing game at the time. One of the most realistic racers we had ever seen at the time. You can only find it on, PlayStation, pretty much, right? And then if you remember playing Super Nintendo games like Super Mario World, Donkey Kong, a lot of the JRPGs of the era were kind of exclusively on Super Nintendo, Chrono Triggers and the Final Fantasy stuff like that. You had to go to Super Nintendo to play those games, and keep going. And on the PC, especially in those early days of like 3D graphics, there was games like Unreal and Quake, Wing Commander, StarCraft, the early days, the Elder Scrolls, the advent of those games, games like that, Command and Conquer, right, that could only be found on PC, and they were catered, designed for PC, mouse and keyboard controls, right, and kind of a wide range of platforms, etc., etc. And that kind of continued, right, and that's what I mean. So when you were looking to buy a console, especially in the beginning of a generation, you wanted to buy that new box, to get that PlayStation 2 or Xbox 360, if you guys, whatever. There was a sense that you were getting this platform and it was going to give you a certain set of exclusive experiences that you could not experience anywhere else, right? And there was a time where, you were like, it's worth building a high-end, brand new PC so I can play, Crysis, right? And some of these, the more, PC-centric titles, right? That you either could only find on PC, or in some cases, if it did come on a console, it still was a fundamentally different experience than what you would find on the PC, right? So basically, that's generally how, things worked for a while. That's kind of how the world worked. And which is what I'm seeing in 2023 is that's all going away, with one major exception, and I'll talk about that. When we look at the landscape now, let's start with Xbox and Microsoft, because they started this early. During the Xbox One era, Microsoft basically said that in all of their new first-party games, and mind you, this is obviously an issue mostly for the first-party games, right? Because third-party games are always coming out on everything, as many platforms as possible. But there still was always a good set of first-party games that you would only find on that platform, right? So Microsoft essentially said all of their first-party games were going to come out at least for the console, the Xbox console, Xbox One at the time, and the PC, day and date, right? So in the past, we've seen, something might come out, be built for the console, then come out on PC later. No, Microsoft said day and date, we're going to release games on both, right? So we saw that with games like Forza Motorsport 7 and Gears of War 5 and stuff like that, right? And the list goes on and on. So Microsoft has been doing this now for, like half of last gen, all of this gen, something like 7-8 years now, something like that. And that kind of makes sense for them, right? Because, they have a huge stake in PC. They own, Windows, right? Which is essentially the heart of PC gaming. So they have this console, this Xbox console, but they also pretty much own the PC. So for them, it kind of makes sense, because they get business either way, right? No matter where you're playing it on. Reason why I think, I'm making this video now is because we're starting to see Sony, the Japanese giant, the console, industry leader. It depends on what circles you talk to. Nintendo as well might have something to say about that, but in general, right? Sony is also kind of moving away from exclusives on their PlayStation consoles, which is a big deal, right? Because Sony has arguably been the king of exclusives, right, for at least the last, couple of decades, really, since the PS3 era for sure. Definitely PS4 era. And what we're seeing is that they're starting to release so many of their games on PC now. So they're not doing it day and date like Microsoft is. They have a staggered delay, which from their perspective, they're saying that still keeps the value in the console, because if you really care about the game and you really want to play it, you're going to still want to get it on the PlayStation. The PC, port might come out typically around 2 years later. 2 years later. So it is a pretty significant gap, but it's coming. So we've seen, this generation, it's 2023. So in the last 3 years or so, we've seen the likes of Uncharted Collection, which is Uncharted 4 plus all the DLC, The Last of Us Part 1, Days Gone, Death Stranding, Spider-Man, God of War, Horizon, right? And literally just today, as I'm recording this, they announced the upcoming release of Horizon Forbidden West coming to PC as well next year, 2024. So I'm probably missing some, but you get the idea. A lot of their big first-party AAA games are coming or are on PC. And that's crazy, right? It's unheard of to think that, you can play God of War on your PC. And I'm sure Ragnarok will be coming soon too. You can play Uncharted and The Last of Us on your PC, right? So there's been a lot of discussion about that, right? Like, what does that mean for the consoles? And is something kind of lost? Is devalue the consoles, and has PlayStation lost some of its luster in that regard, right? Now, I mentioned there was one exception, so I'm going to point it out, of course. Nintendo is still the sole exception here. For the most part, you're only going to find, the latest and greatest Nintendo games on the Switch right now. They haven't released much, on PC. They started releasing some things on mobile, but it's usually not a direct port. There's like different versions of Mario, whatever, right, on mobile. But if you want to get the latest, like Super Mario Wonder coming up soon, and Mario Kart, and games like that, Legend of Zelda, you gotta have to get it on the Switch, and it's not gonna be anything resembling it on a Sony box or a Microsoft box or PC for now. So there's still honoring exclusives, which is why it's not completely dead. But in the from the big mature consoles, they call them, the Sony and Microsoft, it's kind of going away. The PC has already been gone, right? So, like I said, the PC, there was a time where you could only find certain experiences on the PC, and it kind of died with Crysis. And Crysis was like that nail in the coffin, where Crytek lost a ton of money because they invested so much in the technology. It was only able to be played on such a limited amount of hardware at the time, and they couldn't release it on the console, so they just lost a lot of money. And you can see it from Crysis 2 on. They rectified that. Crysis 2 regressed in a lot of ways, and on a technical level at least, and came out for consoles and for a whole much wider range of PCs. But it kind of suffered technically, I would say. And from that point on, it was like, okay, we got to pretty much make everything on console, or at least some version of it being able to run on console. The closest thing we're seeing to it now is some of these really, really big titles that have direct partnerships with the likes of AMD or Nvidia. Games like Cyberpunk, which Nvidia has pretty much had a direct that kind of almost like a co-development deal with, and definitely co-marketing deal. So they pushing for Cyberpunk path tracing, for example, which is kind of bleeding edge technology, stuff like that. And you really do need a super high-end PC to run it. But the core game was, again, a game that was made to run on a PS4 and Xbox One, right? So they're just adding bits and pieces to it there. So that's what's happening. Now, why does this matter? Why would I make a video about this? Why is this important? Well, in my mind, there's kind of three, things about that. There's kind of three takeaways here. The first is the obvious thing. You can make an argument that it devalues the console or the box or the PC in this case or whatever it is. Meaning like there's less incentive to buy that box. I'm old enough to remember and have a lot of memories of, waiting for Christmas morning, right? And being so excited and opening up this box and seeing the Sega Genesis with those, little game screenshots on the box usually, right? Of some of the launch titles, seeing the PlayStation, the original PlayStation, seeing the Sega Dreamcast, the PlayStation 2, list goes on. And there was a sense of wonder and awe, right, at the experiences that these boxes were going to bring you, were going to give you. Part of that was, from a technical standpoint, I'll get into that too, but just from the sake of like, these games look so good. Man, Ridge Racer 5 looks so great. Gran Turismo 3 looks so great, when you saw the previews. Final Fantasy X looks so great, for the PS2. That was part of the excitement. You knew you could only play those games on this box. And just as a gamer, you're just like, I'm so happy to have this box so I can play these games. And when you're sitting back thinking, well, where do you want to invest your money in? Up until now, a big part of the decision was, well, what games do I want to play and where are they? Right? If you cared about Halo, you pretty much were going to get an Xbox. Right? If you cared about, historically Tekken and Final Fantasy and Gran Turismo, like I mentioned, and then later Uncharted and Last of Us, stuff like that, God of War, you're going to buy the PlayStation, right? You're going to buy Sony's box. And again, if you care about Mario and Zelda and stuff like that, you're going to buy a Switch or a Wii or Wii U, whatever, right? That's pretty much how things have operated. Now, in a world like 2023, where you sit back and like, pretty much every game that comes out is on every major platform at least. It's just like, why would you necessarily gravitate to one box or another? There's still reasons, but the reasons have changed quite a bit, right? If you care about, getting a game, you might play it on PlayStation mainly because your friends are there. If you're into social gaming, right? Everything is online, about where your friends are, right? So you might do that. Or you might like the controller better, the DualSense, right? And you might, like the fact that the loading is generally quicker because of the SSD is faster, that kind of stuff. Or you just like the Xbox's UI and your friends are there, or whatever. It's that. But it's not about the games anymore, right? And that does take a little bit of value away, I think. It takes something away from the allure and the attraction, right, of getting a box, like a console, to play those games, right? So that's kind of point number one. Point number two is similar, but it's more technical. When the developer has to develop for a multi-platform, okay, they don't take the time, and they probably don't have the time and the means to really drill in on all of the technical strengths of said platform. Pick a platform, right? If they're releasing like Madden, that's going to come out on everything, right? Old PlayStation, new PlayStation, old Xbox, new Xbox, Nintendo system, blah, blah, blah. It's not going to take advantage of the core strengths of what that PlayStation hardware did, or what that Xbox hardware did, right? Just as an example. To me, we've seen magic. We've seen magic happen in many cases where a developer can really just focus in on harnessing all of the power of a specific box, especially a console, because console is fixed and they can focus on that. By nature, a PC, this doesn't necessarily apply to PC, because by nature, there is no single PC, there is no single SKU. A developer can generally target a certain level, but everyone has so many different PCs, they still have to, accommodate for that. Plus, the actual development environment on PC, the OS and the SDKs, etc., are generally meant to be much more broad and much more abstracted from the hardware for developers, right? To make it easy because there's so many different hardware SKUs. Traditionally, consoles, a developer can really program much more directly to the hardware, which usually yielded better results, better performance, or more advanced technology, right, in the game. And Sony, particularly was renowned for this because their hardware was usually very bespoke, right? PS2 was a whole separate beast from anything that you would ever find on PC, definitely from an Xbox or GameCube at the time. Similarly, the PS3 was very bespoke, very different. That cell processor, blah, blah, blah. So when you saw developers like Naughty Dog really go in, and Insomniac, and Sucker Punch later and whatever. And you saw the magic in Guerrilla for Guerrilla Games Dev Studio. You saw the magic that came out of what like Killzone 2 looked like at the time on PS3, from a graphical level, from a simulation level, from a physics level. It was just on another level. Similarly, MotorStorm was something that did things at the time that we just didn't see. It doesn't necessarily mean that no other hardware can do it, by the way, right? I'm not sitting here saying that a PC of the day technically could not do it. It may not do it the same way. In some cases, it may not do it quite as well, but it could do it. But you just didn't. You know, when Killzone Shadowfall launched on the PS4, we saw that, right, at that PS4 preview event. Technically speaking, of course, it could run on a PC of the day, but you just didn't see any other FPS quite looking like that. Holistically, the lighting, the materials, the PBR effects, the texture detail and resolution, just nothing quite hit like that, because a lot of the other games that was out, FPSs that you would see on a PC, remember, no more PC exclusives either, by and large were older games that were just running faster or better on a PC. Whereas Killzone, the developer can hone in and look at the PS4 spec and say, okay, let's make something, design something built around that level and built around that hardware, and that's what it was. And that's why we saw these generational leaps. Infamous Second Son compared to Infamous 1 or 2 on the PS3, right? Infamous Second Son PS4 launch title looked night and day, worlds apart. Infamous Second Son was one of the most gorgeous games I'd ever seen up to that point. I remember I was so impressed with it. But it looked so much better than what you saw on the PS3. And again, there was nothing else out there that looked like it anywhere. Definitely not on last-gen console and not even on PC. And that kind of rings true throughout the generations. Obviously, if you go back to the magic of seeing Super Mario 64 at the time, and Mario Kart, right? To seeing Sonic Adventure running on the Sega Dreamcast and Soul Calibur, and what that looked like at the time. It blew away even arcade, games that we've seen up to that point. What Final Fantasy X looked like on the PS2, and what Gran Turismo 3 looked like on the PS2. It just looked not just so much better than, the Gran Turismo 2 on the PlayStation 1, but every racer that came before it. And part of that is because those developers were really honing in and focusing on using and utilizing the strengths of those platforms to come up with something that was fairly unique on a technical level. Not completely unique, but fairly unique, right? For those games. And I remember the first time I saw like God of War 3 on the PlayStation 3, mind blown. I just was like, this like the best. I can't believe this is running on a $500 whatever box at the time in my living room. Like that kind of feeling. I felt similar things seeing MotorStorm. I felt similar things obviously seeing Uncharted in The Last of Us, right, on the technical level at the time. Even seeing some games like on the PlayStation 4, Drive Club did a similar thing to me. There were just moments there where it was just like, this looks beyond Gran Turismo, beyond Forza. I mean, there was just some special stuff going on there. What I'm getting at, guys, is, gaming is emotional. And when you think back to a lot of these platforms, if you're following me, you probably have emotional moments, emotional connections with those platforms and some of the games on them. And in many cases, they are fairly unique experiences. You couldn't play Mario Kart with 4 people on your couch, on anything else at the time other than the Super Nintendo or N64 later or GameCube later, whatever, the Nintendo systems. But those memories of playing GoldenEye with your friends, 4 people, you couldn't do that on a PlayStation. You couldn't do that on the Xbox necessarily. The memories of playing Halo, in the early days, whether it was via LANs and then it was online. Again, you couldn't do that on PlayStation, right? So whatever platform it was, there were these unique experiences that garnered emotional response. Some of it was just the fact that the games were only available there, so it's just going to, kind of obviously map in your mind. Some of it was that technically speaking, we saw gaming literally grow up in front of us. When you saw Halo 3 on the 360 for the first time, I remember seeing Call of Duty 2 on the 360 at launch, and that was a freaking eye-opening thing. HD graphics and, remember the smoke effects and the 60 frames per second, whatever. I mean, That's what I remember. And when I look at the Series X and PS5 now, and don't get me wrong, guys, I mean, from a hardware perspective, I love both systems. And you guys know I'm a PS5 guy. I love the PS5 hardware. I could undeniably say that the PS5 is Sony's best hardware from a pure hardware design standpoint, and on a technical level. It's their best system, easily. It's the most balanced. All right, they have updated and addressed everything. They moved the envelope on every aspect: the input, the controller, the I/O, the SSD, the storage, the graphics, of course, the CPU, the RAM, the audio. Right, I mean every aspect of that system, and of course the physical design as well, was pushed forward in a meaningful way. And everything is just really, really balanced, where the system doesn't really have any core bottlenecks, right? And the results are we're seeing ray tracing games in a console. We're seeing 120 hertz games, not just a few, but a good amount, especially on the series side. We're seeing, again, 60 FPS still be more common than not. The results, speak for themselves. I love the hardware, but I'm not having that emotional attachment. What would that be on a PS5? Right? What is the standout PS5 only a game? Think about it, guys. Like, there is none. The handful of PS5 exclusives that are left, games like Demon Souls, I guess, still hasn't been ported to PC, although most people think it's coming, but it still hasn't happened yet. Or Gran Turismo 7, that was great. Horizon, cross-gen, came out on PS4. God of War Ragnarok, cross-gen, came out on PS4. Right? And then a lot of the other, Spider-Man Remastered and Miles Morales, though that was ported to PC now. Ratchet and Clank, awesome game. I would have put that up there, but now it's on PC as well. Right? So these are good games. I still enjoy them. Returnal, one of my favorite games of all time, on PC now as well. The great games, but they don't speak to the PS5 experience because they're not solely PS5 experiences, right? They're all on PC as well, except for Demon Souls, like in that list. But Demon Souls again is a remake of a PS3 game, so it's not a new PS5 experience. But that's probably the closest thing we have left, I guess, right? Now, Spider-Man 2 that's coming out next month, maybe that title for PS5. Forza Motorsport is coming out. Starfield just came out for Xbox. I don't know if that's it. I mean, again, it's on PC as well, and there's 2 Xboxes, so, you don't get a sense like, wow, this is the magic of the Series X. It's not, because it's on the Series S as well, right? And that's always going to be the thing, because Microsoft wants to do that. They want to, tier their system. So that's the problem. All right, I don't feel that. I don't have that, right? It sucks, to me, right? It does take away from some of that allure. It does take away from that sense of wonder that, I grew up feeling so many times with different generations, different systems. Developers now just use a really, really broad stroke, and they just paint their games across all of these different platforms, right? Pro consoles, base consoles, last gen, current gen, PC, with this wide skew of PCs. It's just crazy, and you just see the same. What the result is that a lot of games look the same. A lot of games, there's no sense of specialness, right, to them. They just look the same and they feel the same. That's what I mean. That's what I would say is somewhat getting lost. So, on a technical level, yeah, you don't have those crazy killer moments, just, of seeing an amazing game that you just haven't seen anywhere else that's doing stuff that you just never seen before. That is pretty much few and far in between, if not completely gone, right? The way that looks now is seeing something like, Portal RTX using like just latest and greatest graphical effects and path tracing and ray tracing that kind of make the game look prettier and stuff like that, or super high frame rate esports titles that's running in 300 plus FPS, that kind of stuff. Again, I've said this before, moving pixels or pushing pixels and moving frame rates up is not terribly interesting to me. That's nowhere near next gen. That doesn't deliver new experiences for me. Yes, it's a better experience in most cases, but that's not the same. Seeing I see in like God of War 3, like I said, that blew my mind at 30 frames per second in 720p. Like, that's fine. Um, so that's my thing. That's me. So yeah, and that's probably the third thing is that a lot of games are just feeling more similar than not. A lot of the I would say the creativity. So there's been a hit to creativity among developers. You have to be creative to do some stuff on with the PS3, like hardware, even the PS2 as well. Um, and push the envelope in certain ways. Um, but that's probably the third thing. Is just that games are feeling very similar, very much the same. And don't have that sense of spark, and a sense of like you just haven't seen this before. Where is that? Most people argue now that I guess the closest thing we have to that in today's market is VR, and obviously VR is still not really taking off. It's kind of come and gone. There's still people trying it. The software is it's definitely not the top AAA type games that are going on VR or pushing VR. But you can make an argument that, again, with the latest and greatest VR generation, that, when you're in it and experiencing some of this stuff, it does feel new. It does feel fresh. And I've experienced that myself. So you can make that argument, right? But that's just my take. Ultimately, it's just sad. As someone who's always been primarily a console gamer as well, this is particularly sad. Again, that sense of wonder, sense of awe, and I can go down the list, guys, of almost every generation back to the 80s with the original Nintendo, where I've had wow moments and moments that will stick with me and are entrenched in my mind as being memories attached to that said platform, that said system. Either again because of the game and also because of what it brought technically that was new and different. And that's just missing, guys, especially on the Xbox side. The Nintendo, like I said, is still doing exclusive, but it's missing a lot of that second piece, the technical part, because Nintendo doesn't usually push the tech like that. They still make state-of-the-art, world-class games, no question, but they're not necessarily going to wow you with the technology of it, something new. They might wow you in some cases with just the gameplay mechanics and the game design and that kind of stuff. They still do that. You can definitely see that, but you're missing that piece of like, wow, this is something I never seen or heard before. I don't know. What do you guys think? Am I just crazy here? Are you guys seeing that, feeling that? Are you having that kind of feeling in moments with the series in PlayStation 5? And if so, with what? With what games? Most things on those systems are at this point like 95+% of them are not exclusive. And the few that are exclusive are usually remakes or remasters of older games. So it's not terribly original either. So yeah, what are you having an experience with it, and are you feeling the same things I'm feeling? I really want to know. But death of exclusives, I got a feeling in a few years Nintendo may do something as well. Might not be here in the same way. Sony may reduce that gap from PC 2 years to make it something closer, and maybe day and date by the time we get to next gen or PS6 or whatever, just for business sake. But there was magic coming out, especially with the Sony's first party studios, man. We saw a lot of it in PS4. We saw a lot of it really, really kicking the gear on the PS3, and just not seeing that. Most of these studios haven't released any games. Never mind, and the few that have is just remake or remasters. Ghost of Tsushima remaster. The Last of Us Part 1, which is a remake, they call it, but it's mostly a remaster. Where are the new games? Where are the crazy, new stuff, right? We may never see it. That's all for now. True Techno Gamer here. Appreciate you listening. Like, subscribe, comment, please. I want to talk to you. Let me know what you think about this topic and others. I do absolutely look at the comments and try to reply as soon as possible. So, till next one, thanks a lot. Talk to you soon.